Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to another video. Now, in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how to make jump up drum and bass in the style of Rova. Now, even if you don't know the name Rova, you've probably heard his track Eyes on Me, which absolutely blew up. If you look at any kind of drum and bass content on TikTok at all, Eyes on Me was everywhere. And if you haven't heard it, make sure you go and check it out because it is a banger. Now, this video was actually a suggestion from someone in my Patreon Discord server, so make sure you go and check out my Patreon. You can get access to exclusive tutorials, exclusive dubs, sample packs, preset packs, and you can also grab the project files for this video. And make sure you also check the description for a link to where you can get one-to-one production lessons with me. But yeah, without any further ado, let's hop into FL Studio. Okay, so the first element of the track that we're going to have a look at is the drums, and of course, like I often do with the drums, we're going to start with the kick drum. So, as you can see, I've just got a kick sample here, and if we take a listen, it's got a nice low end thud to it. Now, I'm just going to adjust this out setting. We're going to set it to 30%. Because we don't want to have quite as much of the tail there. And what we can also do is turn it down 100 cents or one semitone. And it starts to make the sound a bit more clicky as well, which I think will work well within the track. And whilst I like this kick sample that we've got here, what I'm actually going to do is layer a click layer on top. And so for this, I've just got this really clicky kick sample. And what we've done is we've just turned it out all the way up. So if I turn that back down, that's what it sounded like originally. But yeah, turned all the way up. Sounds like that, and that's because this is just going to be like a clicky layer on top of the main kick. And then what we can do as well is we can just whack an EQ on there, because like I said, this is a layer on top and we don't want to have the low end of both kicks kind of messing with each other. So I've just done this really harsh low cut and it just sounds like that. And then if we listen to the two together, it sounds like that, as opposed to, it just gives you that extra click on top, which will help the kick to cut through the mix nicely. Now, next up, I've just grabbed this clap sample. Sounds lovely, really nice and clicky. And then I've just added some effects to this clap. So first of all, we've got some distortion, which will just help it to cut through the mix a bit more once again. And then I've added an EQ with a really harsh low end cut to get rid of any unwanted low end, which, especially because we've got the distortion first, before the EQ, it's going to add in some kind of unwanted low end. And we don't really want that. So yeah, I've just cut that off there and added a little bit of a top end boost. And then I've just added fruity reverb too, to give it a bit more stereo width. And then finally for the drums for the moment, I've just grabbed this hat sample. And you can see here I've just adjusted that out to about 50%. So if we put that back to 50%, it's a very minute difference, but I think it will make a big difference within that actual track itself. And then now that we've got these drums in here, they're routed to mixer tracks, we can just set up a simple drum loop like this. Yeah, it's very simple in these Rova tracks. It keeps the drums nice and simple and everything else is doing the work. So if we take a listen here, like I said, really nice and simple. You don't want to overcomplicate it. And then as you can see, I've routed these drums that we've got here to a drum bus, and I've just added some effects on here. So first of all, we've got Standard Clip. It's a great plugin. If you don't have it, I recommend you get it. It's like 25 quid as well, so pretty cheap. And yeah, we're just pushing this. So if we take a listen to just this, really starts to thicken the drums up a bit. Then we've got Saturation Knob, a great free saturation plugin, which once again I recommend that you get. Again, just helping to thicken up the drums. And then we also have this Love filter on here, which we're not going to have a look at right now. We're going to come back to that later. But yeah, now that we've got this main drum pattern down, we can start to take a look at adding in some basses. So here we are inside of Serum, and we're going to make the sub bass first of all. Now for this, we're just going to use a nice old sine wave. We can whack it down 2 octaves. Gets it nice and deep. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a shape on LFO1 just like this. In fact, we'll make it a bit shorter. We can probably drag that up a little bit, and then we're going to just make a point just there. We can set this to envelope mode, leave it on quarter notes. We can drag that down just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this to the coarse pitch on oscillator A. And if we take a look inside the matrix, if you're not familiar with this, it can look quite overwhelming, but it basically just shows where everything is connected. So you can see source is LFO1, which we just dragged onto the coarse pitch, and then the amount, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. But for this, we're going to set this to 10. We're going to set it so it goes one way. So it will just kind of start from 0 and then it will go upwards, as opposed to starting from the bottom of halfway. It's a bit weird to explain, but you can see here it's kind of, that little dot is in the middle and it will start from way down there and go to up top, but we want to start from in the middle. So if we just click that, you can see it's now starting from the white dot and just going up. and it gives you that cool kind of sub bump sound when the sub starts playing. And then if we take a look at what effects we want to add to this sub to thicken it up, first of all we can add some distortion. We're going to grab diode 2 and we can just turn this up to about here. And yeah, that sounds kind of a bit over aggressive, but you'll see what we're going to do with this in a second. Then next up, we can grab a filter, just leave it on MG Low 6, the default one, and then we can turn up the cutoff just a little bit. And it starts to sound a bit more subby. And what we're going to do here is actually a cool trick with the compressor. So set this to multiband mode, and we can turn both the high and mid bands down and turn the low band all the way up. And suddenly everything sounds a lot more subby. And if we turn the drive up on the MG Low 6 filter, yeah, it suddenly sounds lovely and fat and gives you a really thick low end sound. And then I've just added a couple of effects to this sub to thicken it up a bit. So first of all, we've got Fruity Fast Distort. So if I turn this on, it helps to thicken it up a bit and it's going to sit nicely within the mix. And then we've just got some simple kick sidechain. So just use the Fruity limiter. If you're not familiar with sidechain, we just go onto the compression side. Basically, if you see the kick here, we can just click onto here and then you want to turn the level all the way down. So now it's connected, but there won't be actual audio coming through from the kick to the sub channel. It just kind of tells the sub what's going on with the kick. And then we set the sidechain to kick, and then we can mess with the ratio and threshold. So basically when the kick plays, it's going to duck down the sub because obviously they're both quite bassy elements and we don't want them interfering with each other. And then what I've done here is I've just made a simple sub pattern, the kind of thing that you'd see in a Rova track. So if you take a listen to his tracks, you can see he kind of does like these short notes and then longer notes. So if we have a listen here, and then we're going to layer the other basses that we're going to make on top of this. And if we just have a listen as well with the drums on top, they sit quite nicely together. So next up, we're going to look at making the main bass for this track. So first of all, we can grab the Tigra wavetable from inside of Digital in Serum, and we can whack this down 2 octaves. It'll get you a sound like that. And then we can just turn the wavetable position up to about here, I reckon. And yeah, it's already starting to sound quite gritty, quite nice. And then we can make an LFO shape just like this. And then we're going to set this to envelope mode. And if we turn the level all the way down on oscillator A, and we can just assign LFO1 to this. And what we can also do is assign LFO1 to the wavetable position. And it's just going to give it a bit of movement. Now, obviously, that's something that you can mess around with the position of yourself and how much that's modulating, just to get your own kind of unique sound. Next up, we're going to turn on the sub and we're going to turn this down 2 octaves, not 3. We can leave it on this default wave and then we're going to turn the level all the way down and just get a little bit of sub going with LFO1 modulating the level. Now, I can barely hear that, but it will make a difference when we come to distorting the sound. In fact, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Yeah, it will make more of a difference when we come to distorting the sound. And then we can also add in a tiny little bit of noise. So if we drag that down to about there. And again, you can barely hear the difference there, but it will start to become more apparent when we distort everything together. Then we can turn on the filter. We can leave this on MG Low 12, and we're just going to turn the cutoff up to about here. And once again, we're going to modulate this with LFO1. And we're going to set this to go both ways rather than just going up and down. So on my keyboard, it might be different for Windows, but on Mac, I'm just going to hold Option and Shift and click, and it will start to modulate this both ways rather than just one. And we can also just turn this up a bit. And there you go, we've got basically everything done inside of this window. Now we're going to take a look at the effects section. So first of all, we're going to grab an EQ. We can whack that up here because it's going to go at the start of the chain. Then we're just going to turn on the low cut. We can turn the Q down because we don't need that bump. And then once again, just going to modulate this with LFO1. And modulating all of this stuff with LFO1 just helps to get a bit more movement going within the sound. Then next up, we can turn on the phaser, and you might have seen this used in some of my tutorials, but we're going to turn everything down on here apart from the mix, which we're going to leave all the way up, and the frequency, and we're going to modulate this with LFO1. And again, this is one of the things where you can mess with the frequency knob and how much it's being modulated to get your own kind of cool, unique sounds. I think I'm going to modulate that maybe about 7. Yeah, I think that will work well. Next up, we're going to grab a compressor and we're going to set this to multiband mode. Just add a bit of gain as well. Sounding nice. Then we're going to grab the chorus. We can turn the mix down to about here, I reckon. And then also turn up the low pass filter a bit. Just gives it a subtle bit of stereo. And then finally we're going to turn on the distortion. And we're going to set this to asymmetrical mode. Now we can turn the drive up to about here. And you can hear that's really starting to thicken up the sound. And then we're going to modulate the drive with LFO1 like we are with so much stuff. And there you go. Now, looking at the effects that we've got here, I actually don't think we need the sub on because I think I was trying it out earlier, trying out some different techniques, and it worked better earlier, but I mean, you can maybe set it to direct out mode if you want to add a bit more low end. Maybe I'll turn this off, to be honest. Yeah, you can hear the sub coming through there, but to be honest, I don't think we need it, especially because we've got a low cut right at the start. It kind of removes the need for it. And then as you can see, what I've done here is I've just added some effects. So first of all, we've got an EQ, just cutting off some of the low end because we've got the sub bass underneath and we don't want the low end of the main bass interfering with the sub. Then we've got some reverb, just adding some stereo width because the decay's all the way down. The size and diffusion are pretty low. Yeah, it's just helping to add a bit of stereo width. Then we've got an OTT, which is just kind of crispening up the sound ever so slightly. If you don't have OTT, another great free plugin. And we've just got the depth at 28% and everything else is just kind of left where it is. And then we've got a Buildup, which is a plugin that we'll get onto in a bit. You'll see what we're going to do with that. And then once again, just some sidechain from the kick and also from the clap, because obviously this is like more of a mid and high bass, and the claps also kind of operate in that same frequency range. So I've just sidechained them ever so slightly just to help the clap cut through a bit more. And then as you can see, I've just written in some MIDI for this main bass pattern, the kind of thing that you would see in a Rova track. If we just take a listen here. Nothing too overcomplicated, nice and simple like Rova keeps it. And if we take a listen to this, I'll just duplicate these along. Take a listen to this with the other elements that we've got so far. I think it's sitting quite nicely. They both work well together. And yeah, we've got the main basis for the track going here. Now, next up, what I've done here is I've just found some really cool pre-drop vocals. Well, they're pre-drop vocals at the moment, but we're actually going to use them throughout the track, as you'll see in a minute. But yeah, I've just grabbed these vocals if we take a listen.
I'm getting down on the dance floor.
And I've just cut them here as well and added kind of like a loop thing in, which again is something typical of Rova tracks. And then if we take a look at what effects we have on this channel. So first of all, we've just got some simple reverb, just adding a bit of stereo width to the sound, nothing too crazy. And then we just have an EQ taking off any unwanted low end. So yeah, very simple channel strip for this one. And then we also have this reverb here. So here is an automation clip that I made earlier. And if we just group that together so it's easier to keep track of. But yeah, basically what I've done with this is I've just made like a really wet sounding reverb. I think it's actually very similar to this, but just kind of, I've adjusted the dry and the wet and I think turned the decay up slightly and then automated the overall mix level in FL Studio. So if we take a listen to what this is doing here.
I'm getting down on the dance floor.
It just kind of helps to nicely build it into the drop and kind of, yeah, add suspense for what's going to come, helps it transition more smoothly. And then next up, what I've done here is I've just taken one of these little vocal chop cut type things and then put it on a new channel. Make sure you make it unique before doing this, because then you can actually route it to a new mixer track without affecting what's going on with the mixer track routing for this one. And then we've just added some different effects here. So if we take a listen to what's going on with this. It's really subtle in the background, and as you can see, it's super quiet. Yeah, really background, but it just kind of adds an extra layer throughout the track. And if we take a look at these effects, first of all, we've just got some simple reverb once again. I think this might be the same as the other reverb actually, and also just this low end cut. And we've just taken off some high end as well, because like I said, we want it to be a really super background element. And by taking off some of the top end, it's going to push it back a bit in the mix and make it less prominent. And then as you can see, we've just left this gap here. So what I think we can do is add in a bit of this vocal just here. So yeah, I've just cut up a little bit of this main vocal, puts it here, and if we take a listen. It just kind of sits nicely, fills that gap, and take a look at these effects again, very similar to before. Yeah, now I mentioned earlier on this main bass channel, we've got this build verb, so we can actually add in some automation for this now. So I've just made some simple automation here, and what I'm actually going to do is get rid of the sub on this bit and the drums, because we're going to change something with that in a second. But yeah, what this is basically doing is adding in like a cool variation every 4 bars. So if we take a listen here. And like I said, we're going to add something else in there, but if we take a look at what this actually looks like in Fruity Reverb 2, here's the settings if you want to copy them for your own track. And for this little bit, what I'm actually going to do is whack an arm end break in here. And this is just going to help to break up the drum pattern a bit, so if we take a listen here. And then we can, I reckon, loop all of this bit round now. Just copy it across. We want to make sure that's selected as well. Just copy it and drag everything whilst holding shift and it will duplicate. And then a cool trick we can do here, just to add in a bit more variation. So I've just duplicated this hat. We're going to click make unique, which is just there. And then we can turn this down to about there, I reckon. And then what I'm going to do, delete all of these just because it's quicker. Select those and press Command B or Control B if you're on Windows, and it will just duplicate along. And yeah, you've got a slight cool variation in the drum pattern. Obviously, you want to go and change up the main basses as well, just to add in a bit more variation. But yeah, that's kind of the start of what I do, and you can definitely take it further than that. So we've got the main basses for the drop down now. Now let's have a look at the intro and build up sections. So just to make some space, and because I already know this from having worked out earlier, we're going to drag all of these across to bar 18 for this track, and that's where the drop's going to hit. Now then, the first element that we're going to make for the intro is kind of a cool pad, like atmospheric pad thing. So first of all, we're going to take this wave and set it to basic shapes, and we're just going to turn the wavetable position up to there, and we can leave everything else on here for the time being. Next, we're just going to turn on oscillator B and set this to basic shapes. Again, we can leave this on the sine wave. We're going to turn this up 1 octave and 4 semitones. And we can also turn back the level because this is going to kind of be like an extra layer, which isn't too obvious. And we're also going to turn on FM from B. And we can turn it up to about there. Next up, we're going to turn on the sub, whack it down 2 octaves. And we can actually just use this wave here and turn down the level to, I think about there should work well. And next up, we're going to grab a filter, apply this to both A, B, and the sub, and we can turn the cutoff back to about there. Yeah, I think that should work well. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to grab under MISC this slight movement LFO shape thing. We can leave this on off, so it's not going to be an envelope or trigger. We're just going to turn it to off, and then we're going to set this to 2 bars, and we can modulate the cutoff ever so slightly with this. I think we can actually turn that up a little bit. And then we're also going to drag this to the coarse pitch. Once again, we're going to set this to go one way just by holding Shift and Option or Shift and Alt. And then if we take a look in the matrix, we can set this to 6. If I can click it, double click, press 6. And yeah, it's just going to give a slight bit of pitch modulation. It should work nicely. Then in terms of the effects that we've got going on, first of all, we can add some chorus. We're going to turn the mix up ever so slightly, and also the same with the low pass filter. You can hear it starting to give it some stereo, make it sound a bit more like a pad. Next up, we're going to add a multi-band compressor. So yeah, just the compressor, and we can set this to multi-band, add a bit of gain, and we're going to turn down the high and low frequency bands and just leave the mid one at 100% there. Next up, we're going to grab the filter. We can leave this at the default filter, MG Low 6, turn up the cutoff a little bit, and turn up the drive to about halfway. And yeah, it's starting to drive the sound nicely. And finally, we can add an EQ. We're just going to set this to low cut. We can turn down the Q because we don't want that bump. I reckon if we turn it up to about there. And yeah, that's like quite a cool pad sound, quite atmospheric, quite ominous, and we're going to have this playing throughout the intro of the track. And then it's important to note as well that I would just add a low cut to this just to get rid of any unwanted low end, because we want to keep the low end for the drop, not for the intro, and especially not on this pad. And then I've literally just added in the root notes of the track, so D sharp or E flat, and just got it playing this one long note. And then I think we can duplicate this along to there. We probably want to cut it there, but we'll see properly in a sec.
I'm getting down on the dance.
Yeah, that should work nicely. And then you might have noticed that we've left this gap here. So that is just where the intro vocals are going to come in, because as you can see, it comes in slightly before the bar. So yeah, let's add those in now. So what I've done is I've just taken the main bit of the vocals from here, just whack them in here, and then I think we can have them repeating every so often like this. Yeah, that should line up well.
I'm getting down on the dance floor.
And as you can see on the effects, I've just added some reverb and a low cut. And then actually, if we just duplicate them along with the pad like this, we'll make sure that they stay nicely where we want them. We're going to cut the pad back to there again. In fact, I think it was back to there. And then we can also probably mute those vocals. Yeah, we'll mute those vocals because we'll have some extra vocals coming in for the build-up section. And then I thought those vocals sounded kind of dry, so what I've done here is I've just cut off this little last bit where it's saying floor, and then just made that unique, whacked it onto a new channel. And then if we take a look at what effects we've got here, we've just got some delay set to ping pong, set to this time, and then just slightly adjusted the pan so it's going from side to side, turn the wet all the way up and the dry all the way down, and also added a bit of reverb after. And then we're just, like I said, just using that word. So if we take a listen to how that actually sounds within the track.
I'm getting down on the dance floor. I'm getting...
It kind of helps to fill it up nice and atmospheric. And then in terms of other vocals as well, I've just added in these. So again, it's the same vocals made unique. And then I've turned it down an octave this time. So 1200 cents, 12 semitones. And then if we take a look here, we've just got a load of reverb on this. And just this kind of low cut, high cut EQ again to send it a bit into the background. And if we take a listen here.
I'm getting...
It just kind of adds a bit more of that ominous atmosphere. And then finally for this intro section, I think we want to add in a hat sample. So I've just grabbed this hat sample, and I think if we put it in like this, it should work nicely, just to kind of give a bit of rhythm to the intro. In fact, actually, we're not going to have it going there because that's when the build-up's going to start. But if we take a listen here.
Down on the dance floor.
Sits nicely, and in terms of effects, I've just added some reverb to that, nice and simple, again just to kind of keep with the atmospheric feeling of the track. And then we can go into the build-up section. So you might want to have a longer intro in your tracks, obviously. This is just kind of like a demo track to demo the main elements going on. But yeah, so we're going to start taking a look at the intro bit. So in terms of the drums, let's have a look at those first. So as you can see, I've just made this very simple kick build-up pattern, just using the kick layer, not the kick click layer. We'll keep that for the drop itself. And I've also just turned down the volume, so the clip gain on all of these. So literally just selected them all, selected that and dragged it down -5.2, just to kind of keep the main volume of the kick for the drop, help it keep the impact in the drop, not in the build up. And if we take a listen to this.
Down on the dance floor. I'm getting down on the dance floor.
Like I said, very simple, but it will be effective. And then earlier on when I mentioned this love filter, what we're actually using it for is in the build-up. So you can see we've just got this low pass filter pattern, just modulating the cutoff in Fruity Love filter. And yeah, that's just a cool effective technique you can use with the drums and sometimes with the basses and other elements in the build-up. And as you can see, I've just added another Amen break, this time in the build-up, to kind of help keep the momentum going, help build it up as we go from the build-up into the drop. So if we just take a listen here. And yeah, it's starting to come along nicely, but obviously there's a couple of other elements that we need because the build-up, whilst it kind of works, it sounds a bit empty and boring at the moment. So once again, I've just grabbed this kind of chopped up bit and we've just whacked it in the build-up here with some automation on the reverb. So in terms of effects on this, once again, some big reverb there. Just an EQ, it's very similar to before, and once again this build verb, which we're just automating the mix level for. So if we take a listen to how that sounds in the build-up.
On the dance floor. Down on the...
It just helps to build that atmosphere up. But yeah, let's add in one of the main elements for the build-up that's really going to start to kind of build the hype up. Because yeah, whilst it sounds cool, it's a bit boring at the moment. So once again, we're inside of Serum, and what we're going to do for this bass is we're going to grab the basic shapes wavetable, whack this down 1 octave, and we're going to turn the wavetable position up to there. And we can turn the level all the way down because we're going to modulate this with LFO1. So if we just make a shape like this, nice and simple. And then we can set this to envelope mode. And we're just going to add a little bit of sub. So if we turn the level all the way down and once again modulate this. Again, very subtle with the sub. And then we can turn it on the filter. And we're going to set this to this key track mode. So basically when you play a higher note, the filter will open more. When you play a lower note, it will open less. Which you might be able to tell from that. And then we're going to set this actually to band 12. And then I think we can turn it down to about there, and we're going to crank the resonance up. And then we can modulate the cutoff with LFO1, set this to go both ways. and then yeah, we'll modulate it about that much. And this is one of those things where you can mess around with how much you're modulating it, the cutoff, just to get your own different kind of tones going on. And yeah, this sounds kind of boring at the moment, so the main parts of this sound come from the effects that we're going to use. So first of all, to thicken everything up, we're going to add some distortion on diode 1. Starting to sound nicer. We can turn the mix back to about 50%. Then we're going to grab an EQ. We'll whack this up here, and we're going to turn the Q down because again we don't want that bump, and add a very subtle low cut. And then we can turn on the compressor. We're going to just set this to multiband mode and add a little bit of gain. And then next up, we're going to grab some hyper dimension. We can turn the mix all the way down on the hyper section, and then we're going to set both the size and the mix to, I think, about there on the dimension bit. Just gives it a very subtle bit of stereo width, but it works nicely. Then we can turn on the reverb. We're going to turn the mix down a little bit, and then we can leave basically all of these where they are, and we're just going to turn down the decay and the size to about there. In fact, I think we can turn the mix up a bit more. Yeah, I think to about there. Very subtle reverb, but it works nicely with the sound. And then in terms of effects on this inside of the mixer, first of all, we just have this EQ with a low end cut. Just getting rid of some of the low end because again, it's kind of a build-up element, so we don't want too much bass in it. We want to keep the bass for the drop. And then we just have some fruity reverb too. Just adding to the atmosphere because again, it's a build-up element. We want to get a cool atmosphere going with this. And then you can see we also have a filter, so we're going to use that in a sec when we've got our main pattern inside of the track. So I've just made a simple kind of pattern with the MIDI for this 303 style bass, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, you can see it's the kind of way that this is written is with a bunch of these short, like stabby, jumpy notes. And we're also doing these big octave jumps. So you can see we've gone from D sharp here to D sharp up there. And that will give you a cool kind of sound. Yeah, really helps to build up the hype in the build up. So if we take a listen to this, it's quite a hyped up part. I think it's quite cool personally. And then in terms of the filter I mentioned before, you can see we've just got the low pass filter here. So again, this is automating the cutoff on this love filter.
Getting down on the dance floor. Getting down on the dance floor.
And yeah, it really helps to kind of just add another layer that's going to build up the build-up, just adds more hype, adds more excitement as you go from the build-up into the drop. And then the last two elements that we've got here, or the last element kind of spread across two samples, is I've just added in these two riser samples, again, just to kind of help build everything up nicely. All we've got on these is just low cut filters because, again, like I keep on saying, we don't want too much bass in the build-up. And yeah, they just kind of help, once again, add more excitement to the build-up, keep the energy going. But yeah, that's basically it for this track. If you are following along, you should have something like this.
I'm getting down on the dance floor. I'm getting down on the dance floor. I'm getting down on the dance floor. Down on the dance floor, floor. I'm getting
But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them as a comment and I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you have. As I mentioned earlier, make sure you check out my Patreon where you can get the full project file for this track, as well as loads of other cool stuff like exclusive sample packs, preset packs, dubs, way more tutorials, all cool stuff like that. And also check out the link in the description if you want to get a one-to-one production lesson with me. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.